nirasya sarva sandeham ekikritya sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram Namashrishtam manumapi shachiputramatra swarupam rupam tasyagrachamurupurim maturim gushtavatim Radha kundam girivaramaho radhikamadavasham praptoyasya pratita kripaya shri gurum tam natosmi Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananya Vilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jadamano Vritti Prasannananam Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payo Rasho Muda Kedato Vande Bhagavatani Mananulavam Murdna Nipatyakshito Namo Mahavaranyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tvishe Nama Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamater Gati Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Kulari Devatamar Madana Mohan Jar Seva Raghunatha Rup Sanatan Jaya Rupa Sanatana Bhatta Raghunath Shri Jiva Gopala Dasa Raghunath Echai Goshai Kori Charana Bandhan Jaha Hoite Vignanasha Bhishta Puran Adadanastiram Jantayar Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Julisyam Janma Janmani. So, by the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Swabhajana Vibhajana, Prayojanavatar Prema Purushottam, Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu, and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava charges, the fulfiller of his heart's desire, for this world, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali. So we're in the midst of discussion of the second verse of Sriman Mahaprabhu's Shikshastakam. In our last discussion we discussed the first 2 points made in the verse, namely that Bhagavan has numerous names and he does so that everyone can chant some name or names of his that are found to be relishable and suited to one's personal taste. And secondly, we discussed that all these names are imbued with all of his shakti, all of the shakti that's found in performance of austerity and fire sacrifice and charity and various other forms of bhakti, etc. All other auspicious acts, the benefit that can be had, the effect that can be produced by all of these things is so also present in the name and can be achieved through chanting the name. And moreover, all this shakti present in the name also indicates that the name can reveal Bhagavan's forms, his qualities, his leelas, his abodes, everything within him. So, having discussed these 2 points in the verse, today we'll come to the third point in the verse, and then we'll see how far we get into the second half of the verse, where reflection is then made upon these first 3 points. So, I've shared the file, and unless there's any comment or question, I will start. Sriman Mahaprabhu next states in the verse that time is not regulated with respect to Sri Bhagavan's names, niyamitaḥ, smaraṇe kālaḥ. This point is discussed in the Bengali explanation of this verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita as follows. While eating or lying down wheresoever one can take the name, there are no regulations regarding time or place. So this choice of words is somewhat precise, because especially for persons who aren't raised in the Sanatana Dharma style culture, the amount of rules and care that is taken about eating and cleaning up after eating and keeping dishes organized as per different standards of purity, and what to do with food remnants, and all of these different things that are very carefully attended to within the Sanatani culture may not be given so much attention elsewhere. So to say here that you can chant even while eating is a big deal, because typically there's a prohibition on doing practically anything while you're eating. Food is to be shown the highest respect. It is anna, Ma Lakshmi is Annapurna. This anna is conceived of as like a direct manifestation of Bhagavan's Shakti, of Bhagavan's grace. It's so called Bhagavan's Prasad, so it's always to be given the utmost attention and respect. So to say that you can multitask or you can do something else even while eating is very significant. And the principle being that when chanting the name, you're not doing something other insofar as you're also honoring the very same devata, the very same source that is honored when the prasad is being honored. And similarly, lying down is also mentioned because the state of sleep is considered tamasic, the place, the cloth, etc., all involved in the tamasic act is said to take on the tamasic character. So typically any forms of auspicious rites and forms of austerity and so forth are kept isolated from tamasic elements. Yet the name is of such great potency that there's no such consideration regarding doing it even in a tamasic place or even in the midst of a tamasic activity. And here by saying wheresoever, it means even if one is in a contaminated place, even if one is in a public place, what have you, one can still take the name. So thus this is a way of characterizing vividly the idea that it's not regulated in terms of time or place. So the verse itself only mentions time, but here in the Bengali explanation, reference to place is also made, and in the relevant sections of Hari Bhakti Vilas we also find the same. So we can take it that although Mahaprabhu only mentioned time, he was intending to refer to place as well. So I've got a stack of citations in this regard. The following verses are cited in Hari Bhakti Vilas, primarily in the subsection about the names being worshipable always and everywhere in this regard. So sada sarvatra sevyatam, that the name is worshipable sada always and sarvatra everywhere. This is how Sanatan Pad summarizes this subject matter. So I'll just read these verses. Obeisance and obeisance forever unto they who speak Hari's name while sleeping, eating, moving, standing, and speaking, meaning speaking of other things. Means whatever you're doing, if one also chants Bhagavan's name, then this makes one worthy of great honor. One should always and everywhere chant the names of the wielder of the chakra, since he is purifying and there is no consideration of impurity in chanting about him. Purity and so forth in regard to place, time, and circumstance is not relied upon by one who chants the name of Sri Bhagavan. Rather, this name is verily an independent bestower of all objects. There is no regulation in regard to place or time, and there is no consideration of purity or impurity. One is liberated just by the Sankirtan of Ram, Ram. O King, there is no regulation in regard to place and no regulation in regard to time with respect to continuous kirtan of Vishnu's name. There is no doubt in this regard. There is a designation of propriety with respect to time for charity and sacrifice. There is a designation of propriety with respect to time for bathing and proper japa. There is no designated proper or improper time here on the surface of the earth for Sankirtan of Vishnu. That is, Bhagavan Nama Sankirtan can be done at any time. The significance of these remarks, I should say, is that the practice of Nama Sankirtan is markedly different from all the various meritorious acts that are enjoined for those following the path of karma. Since there are strict rules regarding purity of the body and materials in the performance of various types of charity, sacrifice, ritual worship, mantra japa, and so forth. But there are no such rules applicable to chanting the names of Sri Bhagavan. They can be chanted by anyone, anywhere, at any time, provided circumstances are such that one will not cause any offense to any Vaishnava or deity of Sri Bhagavan by doing so. So one little clause there, and that's what will come up later in here, is that obviously the name has to be chanted without offense. So when it says there's no rules regarding time or place, that's true, but if there's such a circumstance where one will end up making offense by doing so, then we have to infer that this general rule that one can chant anywhere always doesn't overrule the principle that the name should be chanted without offense. So because, as we'll see in this commentary, Mahaprabhu laments the existence of offense to Bhagavan's name, we can take it that it's his intention that this idea that there's no time or place unfit for chanting isn't meant to imply that one need not be cautious of committing offense. So the offenses to the name will come a little later in this discussion. Sriman Mahaprabhu next states, "Such is your grace, O Bhagavan, etādṛśī tava kṛpā, Bhagavan." The implication being that the name is a most extraordinary manifestation of Bhagavan's grace. Since the name exists in many, many different forms, such that some form of it is sure to be well suited to the taste of any individual bhakta. The name contains all the shakti that is found in all other types of meritorious deeds, such that it can purify one of all sins and offenses, and bring about the attainment of any and all objects. And there are no rules regarding the time or place or condition of the body with respect to chanting the name, such that chanting the names of Sri Bhagavan is a practice that is universally accessible to all and requires a minimum of effort. Thus, the practice of Sri Krishna Sankirtan is easier and more accessible than any conventional act of merit, possessed of greater capability to benefit the performer than any such meritorious act, and available in forms that are sure to meet the personal taste of performers. What could be a greater expression of Bhagavan's grace than this? Sriman Mahaprabhu in this spirit thus says, "Such is your grace, O Bhagavan," meaning your grace manifest in the form of your name is incomparable. So, I think that's clear, I won't elaborate. Finally, Sriman Mahaprabhu concludes the verse with an expression of humility. So now we come to the fourth line. "Yet my misfortune is such that no anurāga for your names has arisen in me." The Bengali translation in Chaitanya Charitamrita renders this simply and directly. Quote, "My misfortune is that I have no anurāga for your names." The commentator offers an additional interpretation wherein the word api is taken to indicate the world, such that the meaning becomes, quote, "The misfortune of myself and the world is such that it is beyond the scope of the speech of the mind and speech. That is, it is so severe that it is indescribable and incomprehensible. Since anurāga for these names of yours has not arisen in me or others. The tongue, mind, and other senses remain fixated upon talking, listening, and remembering other things. Still today no anurāga has appeared for your names. Fie, fie upon me." So the commentator gets a little colorful here. I like it. I thought it was worth including because, it's, if you've ever, what can you say, like had a bird trapped in, accidentally fly inside a window and you're trying to help the bird get out free, but it's so scared or it's so bewildered that it can't manage to just fly back out the window that it was in. Then even if you open the window, even if you put a bit of food on the windowsill, even if you use a cloth or a stick and point out the way to go, or even if you gently coax the bird to go out, still, when it doesn't, and it neglects the wide open window and the food and all the effort that you're doing to try to help it, and because of its own lack of understanding of the situation, perpetually keeps evading your attempts to free it, then you feel some compassion and a little bit of irony in the case of the bird. So these jivas in samsara, how about them? They've been given how much mercy, how greatly is Bhagavan endeavoring or arranging to bless them and to uplift them and to provide such an accessible, such a charming, such a beautiful means for their deliverance. How could you make it any easier? You don't even have to move the body, you don't even have to get out of bed. I mean, obviously not entirely, but in gist, it can be that simple to at least start, or to at least do when there's no other way. So when things have been provided in such a magnanimous and accessible manner, and still people can't manage to take to it, can't manage to actually follow it, then it is, you can say an indescribable or incomprehensible circumstance that how much they're missing out on in the divine world by preoccupying themselves with this illusory world. They can't even comprehend, they can't even describe how much they're missing out on. Even an instant of missing out on that, infinite, pure spiritual love and bliss found in that plane is an infinite loss and opportunity cost, so to speak. And it's squandered on these, self-defeating pseudo-pleasures that only perpetuate one's dissatisfaction and entanglement. So, for this reason, he laments, saying, "Fie upon me." So, this is the spirit of the expression. Now let's look more at the meaning. To grasp the spirit of Sriman Mahaprabhu's expression of humility here, it is important to understand the import of his use of the word misfortune, durdaivam. As the English word misfortune refers to a fortune that is regarded as unfavorable, so the Sanskrit word durdaivam refers to a fortune or destiny that is regarded as unfavorable. But to be more specific, the following definition of the word daiva is worthy of consideration. Quote, "Karma accrued in previous births is called daiva." So destiny, or fate, or what have you, in Western culture is sometimes considered a kind of wispy, loose concept, but from the Indic perspective, it's a very concrete concept. Whatever you've done in the past, that's your destiny. It's going to come back to you. Not less, not more, to the T, the exact amount. So what is the destiny that you're experiencing? It's just the outcome of your past actions. So daiva, destiny or fortune, is what is created by the activities you performed in your past lives. And some particular section of that past karma will be allotted to you in this life, and that's called prarabdha karma, or the karma that has come to fructify and will take place in the course of this birth. So when the word daiva is understood in this way, then the word durdaiva refers not to misfortune in the sense of mere bad luck. Or in other words, it's not just somehow or other, or with a mystery or something like this, but rather to the negative consequences of one's own past actions. That is, the past actions one has committed that result in a non-manifestation of anurāga for Bhagavan's names. So he's saying, because of my durdaiva, I don't have anurāga. So what is this durdaiva? It's the outcome of your past actions. So therefore, this I don't have anurāga because I did actions in the past that have precluded me from being able to experience anurāga in the present. I've disqualified myself or distanced myself from that anurāga of Bhagavan's names by my past actions. And therefore, I have no feeling of it now. So what kind of actions do that? The nature of these actions can be inferred as follows. One name of Krishna destroys all sin and manifests sadhana bhakti, the cause of prema. With the arising of prema, the transformations of prema occur. Perspiration, trembling, horripilation, stammering, streams of tears, and so forth. Easily the cessation of material existence and service to Krishna then come about. We gain such wealth as a result of just one name of Krishna. If someone takes this name of Krishna many times, and yet still neither prema nor streams of tears emerge, then we know numerous offenses are present in them, and the seed of Krishna's name has not sprouted in them. So one name of Krishna is sufficient to liberate you from material existence, to fill your heart with Krishna prem, and thereby to cause streams of tears to pour from your eyes. So if you've chanted the name, once, 10 times, 1 round, 16 rounds, 1 lakh for 1 year, whatever your count may be, whatever quota you keep for however long, is that something to be proud about? I chant this every day. or is that rather a matter of remorse? After this much chanting, still I'm in this condition. When just one name chanted without offense is sufficient to produce the effect or to give rise to the experience one seeks. The inference made here that offense is the cause of non-manifestation of prema is based on the following verse in Srimad Bhagavatam. Quote, that heart which cannot be transformed, that is melted by Hari's names being chanted, oh, that heart is made of iron. When transformation, that is melting of the heart, occurs, water in the eyes and horripilation in the pores appear. So this is certainly a charming statement. We find it cited in the Charitamrita and other works. In other words, to chant the name of Krishna, what an endearing thing, what an enriching thing. How could you not have your heart melt? Just the way some people might, be fond of romantic comedies or love stories or, romance novels or something like that, and say, you've got to read this book. You won't have there's no way you can watch this movie or read this book and still have dry eyes. It's impossible. Meaning it evokes such a feeling of love that you cannot but become emotional when you're exposed to it. Just as things in the world, people may, consider certain music or certain movies or certain literature to be so evocative of emotion that it's impossible not to be moved by it. Like that for the Vaishnavas, to chant the name of Krishna, you're chanting the name of Krishna and tears are not pouring from your eyes? How is it possible? How can it not happen? How could someone not be moved to tears by chanting Hari's name? The only explanation is that you don't have a heart. The only explanation is that your heart is like stone, it's like metal, it's like iron. What else could be? If you had a heart, it would certainly feel something when you're chanting something so sweet, so rich as the name of Hari. This is something of the sentiment. So, it was explained in Srimad Bhagavatam 11-40, Evam Vrita, this verse that was cited earlier about how by chanting the names for which one has taste, then anurāga appears in the heart. So in that verse it says, cited above, that melting of the heart is an outcome of the presence of anurāga, that is prema, having manifested in the heart. And in regard to this verse in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.3.24, Sri Chakravarti Pad comments that the absence of melting of the heart, even after one has taken the name profusely, is an indication of offense to the name. So one verse is saying, if you chant the name, then you achieve prem, and your heart melts. And the other verse is saying, if you chant the name and your heart doesn't melt, and you don't experience prem, then you've committed offense. Thus, it can be concluded that committing offenses obstructs the manifestation of prema in the hearts of those who engage in sadhana bhakti. The quote, misfortune, durdaivam, spoken of in the verse under discussion, is thus to be understood to refer to one's past offenses, and to be the cause of one's lacking anurāga for Sri Bhagavan's name. This conclusion can be further affirmed by reference to a verse of Sri Rupa Pad in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Quote, let alone having faith, shraddha, in them, that is, let alone performing them with faith, even slight connection with these 5 limbs of bhakti, of difficult to comprehend and wonderful power, that is, even slight performance without faith, of association with sadhus, nama kirtan, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, residing in Mathura, or worshipping a deity of Sri Bhagavan, gives rise to bhava in those of pure mind. So even if you don't believe in them, these acts of bhakti have their own power, which can produce the presence of bhava in the mind or the heart of the person who performs these acts. The only critical caveat is the very last point, the way the translation is written, in those of pure mind. Sri Jiva Pad comments here that, quote, those of pure mind are those whose minds are free from offense. And thus, this verse by Sri Rupa Pad indicates that when Namakirtan is performed by someone free from offense, bhava, meaning an initial manifestation of prema, will become manifest in the person's heart. This statement thus implies that prema will not manifest so long as offense or aparad remains within the heart. Sri Jiva Pad also explains this conclusion in Bhakti Sandarbha. It is rightly stated that emergence of the result, that is prema, comes about just by bhajan and so forth once, provided no past or present offense is to be existent. Actually, that should be is existent, I don't need it to be. So, if you're free from offense, one act of bhakti and you'll experience prem. Even though bhakti's greatness is indeed real, where the manifestation of the result of various types of bhajan is not seen, that is, in cases where prema does not become manifest, and in some shastras where otherwise, that is, non-attainment of such result, is heard of even in the case of ancient persons, there in those cases it is to be said that the difficult to overcome offenses, aparadhas, of assumed exaggeration, artavad, assumed fabrication, kalpana, regarding the name, disregard for Vaishnavas, and so forth, are alone the cause of obstruction of the result of prema becoming manifest. So this is a verse that Baba, or a statement rather, that Baba quotes quite often. So, why isn't there prem from one act of bhakti? Aparad. And what kind of aparad? Disrespect to the Vaishnavas and disregard for the divine nature of the name, among other things. As for the most part in the case of people of the present day, because such aparad is present in people's minds, there is obstruction of bhakti, that is, non-manifestation of bhakti's result, prema. So why don't we see that people achieve prema? Why does it seem so rare? Because offense is so common. Specifically in regard to such obstruction, there is a statement in the Vishnu Dharma, quote, speech contaminated by untruth and so forth is unfit to praise Keshava, just as the rays of the moon, blocked by clouds, are not able to dispel darkness. The analogy given here indicates that offense is comparable to a cloud. Although it may appear to a casual observer that the moon or the sun at times becomes covered by a cloud in the sky, it is actually more appropriate to say that the eyes of an observer on earth become covered by the cloud, and thus blocked from receiving the light of the moon or the sun. Similarly, offense does not cover over the greatness or power of acts of bhakti, or Sri Bhagavan's name, but rather covers over the psyche of the jiva, such that the effects which bhakti and the name can produce are not observed to occur. So if the name is not different than Bhagavan, if bhakti is also constituted of Bhagavan's Sarup-śakti, and thus in terms of potency non-different than Bhagavan, then why should some wrong action of some deluded jiva, which is a product of Maya, inhibit that power? Why should this bit of the Maya Shakti have greater power than the Sarup Shakti? Why should the worldly Shakti have less power than the divine Shakti? So to clarify that it's not that this world, the Maya Shakti, is overpowering or more powerful than the Sarup Shakti, it's just inhibiting the effect of the Sarup Shakti to take place in a particular area that's also constituted of the Maya Shakti itself, namely the psyche of the jiva. So it's not that clouds can cover the sun or the moon, it's just that they can cover over the eyes of people. And Jiva Goswami gives another analogy in this regard. Quote, sometimes an inherent capability in an object is seen to be obstructed, like the capability to burn in wet wood and so forth. So wood contains within it the inherent capability to burn. But sometimes that inherent capability of being able to be burnt gets suppressed, or it gets obstructed by anything such as water, such that it appears that wood is unable to burn, even though it does inherently possess the capability to burn. So this is how he's comparing the effect of aparad. Here, Sri Jivapad's point is that even though acts of bhakti have the inherent potency to purify their bearer and produce a manifestation of prema, they are not observed to do so when aparada is present. And I should say immediately. Observed to do so when aparada is present. As a log that has been drenched in water does not burn, even when subjected to fire, so a psyche polluted by aparad does not become inflamed with prema as a result of acts of bhakti. I should say rather, as a result of an act of bhakti. Yet as a wet log gradually becomes dried out when kept near a fire, and eventually does burn once all the water has been expelled from it, so a psyche that is polluted by aparad can gradually be purified of that offense by acts of bhakti, such as chanting Sri Bhagavan's names. And when the psyche becomes sufficiently purified, then bhakti's primary effect, prema, does become manifest therein. So it's not that the repetition has no value. I could have included it here, but I'm going to include it on the commentary on the next verse, because it's more poignantly discussed there, is that it's cited by Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas, a particular passage from the Vedanta Sutra, sometimes Baba refers to this, where it explains that the injunctions in the scriptures to repeat devotional practices are all for the purpose of purging the psyche of aparad. So why is repeated practice necessary and why is it enjoined? This is why. There's no other reason. Otherwise, once would be enough. So it is for this reason that cleansing the mirror of the mind was described as the first effect of Sri Krishna Sankirtan in the first verse of the Shikshastakam. So because these other effects, such as the experience of prema and anubhava of Krishna and so forth, don't happen until one is purified of aparad, and in other words, until the psyche is purified, then the first effect said to take place by chanting the name is the purification of the mind. And once that's done, then these other things will come to pass. So it's not that there's no effect, it's just that the effect first, that takes place first, is the purification effect. Also, as people in a particular locality where rain clouds have filled the sky may say that the weather in that place on that day is unfortunate, so jivas whose psyche is covered over by offense and thus devoid of anurāga for Sri Bhagavan's names are said to suffer from misfortune in the second verse of the Shikshastakam. So this is how we can logically arrive at the meaning of the term durdaiva, or misfortune, or rather the ill effects of one's past actions, specifically past offenses. So, having heard all of this and understanding the necessity of purifying oneself of these offenses, then we want to know how to do that, and what are these offenses that need to be avoided, and what are the tendencies within those offenses that need to be removed from our psyche so that we don't keep committing them in the future. So therefore, we'll also now discuss the 10 offenses to the name of Hari. In regard to the purification of offenses to Sri Bhagavan by means of Sri Bhagavan's name, the following verse from Padma Puran is cited by Sri Rupa Pad, Sri Sanatana Pad, and Sri Jiva Pad. So this is from the same chapter where the 10 offenses are listed in the Padma Puran. There's many verses in this chapter that are quoted throughout Hari Bhakti Vilas, Chaitanya Charitamrita, the Sandarbhas, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and so on. So, we have the following. Even one who has committed all types of sins is delivered from the consequences of those sins by taking shelter of Hari. And a reprobate among the two-legged, who shall commit offenses even to Hari, verily overcomes the consequences of those offenses on account of the name of Hari, should he at any time take shelter in the name. As a result of offense even to the name of Hari, the well-wisher of all, however, one certainly falls down. So if you commit sins, you can be purified by taking to the path of bhakti, by taking shelter in Hari. And if you commit offense to Hari, you can get purified of that offense by taking shelter of the name. But if you commit offense to the name, then there's nothing else that can help you with that. Rather, the name itself is ultimately the only way to be purified of the name, and we'll hear more about that later. Sri Sanatana Pad comments on this verse as follows. Offenses to Hari refers to the aforementioned 32 offenses stated in the Varaha Puran and other texts, i.e. it refers to the offenses that can be made to a deity of Sri Bhagavan. If one who is a, quote, reprobate, that is the lowest among the two-legged, that is among human beings, this is like some classical Sanskrit derogatory talk. It sounds a little funny in English, but to refer to a reprobate among the two-legged is to say that you're the lowest of human beings. So, if one who is such should at any time take shelter in the name, that is, become a performer of kirtan of the name, then by the influence of the name he overcomes, that is, he is verily delivered, even from those offenses the object of which is Hari, that is, the deity form of Hari. as a result of offense even to the name, which is the well-wisher of all, that is, which is disposed to uplifting the world, however, one certainly falls down, that is, goes to nāraka. It is thus understood that offenses specifically to the name of Sri Bhagavan are the most severe type of offenses and the primary cause of a jiva's bondage in samsara. Thus, the mention of, quote, misfortune by Sriman Mahaprabhu in the verse under discussion primarily refers to offenses to Sri Bhagavan's name. These offenses are generally regarded to be 10 in number and are mentioned in Padma Purana. The 5 verses wherein they are stated will now be cited, and following each verse, the comments made on them by Sri Sanatana Pad and Sri Jiva Pad in the etādṛśī on Hari Bhakti Vilas and Bhakti Sandarbha, respectively, will be cited. So we'll now discuss these 10 offenses, and we'll look at how, in some cases, Sanatana Gosvami and Jiva Gosvami give slightly different viewpoints about the meaning of the text in the Padma Purana. So, number 1, defamation of the sat, that is, the sadhus, the Vaishnavas, causes the greatest offense to the name. Oh, how can the name tolerate condemnation of those on whose account it has attained renown? In other words, the Vaishnavas are the champions of the name. The name becomes praised and sung throughout the world by means of the Vaishnavas who chant it and cherish it within their hearts and show its power by virtue of the tears from their eyes and the noble character they exhibit and so forth. So if you go and engage in defamation and other offenses to those Vaishnavas, how is the name going to like that? Not going to like it at all. So Sanatana Pad comments as follows: on account of whom yata means on account of the sat. Renown means notoriety, publicity, or attainment by others. O, or the particle u, is in the sense of lamentation. How can the name tolerate condemnation of them? Indeed, rather, it certainly cannot bear it. Thus, this is an offense, and because of its prominence, mention of it is first. Okay, that's clear. Now we'll hear Jiva Goswami's explanation. Defamation of the sat. By this statement, violence and so forth, that is, and other forms of offense more grievous than defamation, are shown to be outside the scope of speech. That is, so greatly offensive that there is no need to even mention them. So it's not that defaming a sadhu is an offense, but beating him up is not. Or ripping him off is not. It's like, no. If doing defamation of him is an offense, then physically attacking him is even worse. This is Jiva Goswami's interpretation. So another interpretation could be that defamation is the ultimate harmful thing, because there are statements in the Bhagavān and Sanskrit literature that say, causing pain to the body, people can get over that. But when you pierce their egos, when you hurt their hearts, that stays with them for their whole life. They never forget. There are statements like that. So if someone were to raise that point as an objection to Jiva Goswami's comment, my reply would be that Vaishnavas are of such a humble nature that type of pain in the heart isn't so applicable to them. In other words, the defamation of the ignorant doesn't have such a swaying influence over them, because they don't have some false pride that's getting crushed by such remarks. So, just in case anyone finds that interesting, that's my 2 cents on that. But Jiva Goswami's point is that if defamation is an offense, that implies all other forms of harm of Vaishnavas is also an offense. And, defamation and so forth are indeed described in the conversation of Sri Markandeya and Bhagirata in the Skanda Purana. Quote, fools who engage in defamation of great Vaishnavas fall into that which is known as Maha-Raurava, along with their forefathers. Striking, defaming, despising, not respectfully greeting, getting angry with, and not being joyful upon seeing Vaishnavas are 6 causes of falling into Naraka. So this is 6 types of Vaishnava aparad: to physically harm them, to defame them. And I know that oftentimes people use the word criticism. I personally don't translate ninda as criticism, because ninda is defined in the commentaries on Bhagavatam by Sri Rupa as dosha kirtanam, or to do kirtan of the faults. In other words, to make known or to repeat and to spread out the faults of someone. So that is defaming of them, or to create, negative press, so to speak, about them. So to be quote-unquote critical is not always, the word critical in English has a broader scope of connotation and meaning. There's also what you call constructive critique and, other forms of the word criticism which aren't necessarily always equivalent to publicizing the faults of someone to the public or in general. So I find the word defaming a little bit more precise in terms of the way ninda is defined. For that reason, I translate it that way. Striking, defaming, despising, in other words, fostering ill will towards the Vaishnava. Not respectfully greeting, that's obvious what that means. Getting angry with, and not being joyful upon seeing Vaishnavas. So, to see a Vaishnava, one should show respect, and there should be some satisfaction at having the chance to see a Vaishnava. This is a point. And in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, when Sanatana Gosvami speaks about what is to be done during the 6th and 7th phases of the day, in other words, in the afternoon, by a Vaishnava, following all the strictures he lays out in Hari Bhakti Vilas, then he says that one should go and associate with Vaishnavas during that time and hear the Bhagavatam. And then he says that, and when one goes to an assembly of Vaishnavas, one should wear tilak, because if one does not wear tilak, upon entering that assembly of Vaishnavas, not everyone may understand that you are a Vaishnava, and therefore not everyone may show respect to you when you arrive, and therefore those persons will commit offense to you, and you will be the cause of them committing offense to you because you didn't make it clear to them that you were a Vaishnava. So therefore, the consequence of the offense will fall on you. He brings this point out in his commentary. So he enjoins that Vaishnavas wear tilak, or Vaishnavas present themselves as such, so that respect can be shown to them appropriately. So the importance of greeting Vaishnavas, showing some satisfaction upon seeing them, these are part of the culture. Okay, moving on. A fault is also stated to exist even in the case of only hearing defamation of them. So it's not only an offense to speak ninda, but to hear it is as well. So in the Bhagavatam, the following is said: upon hearing defamation of Bhagavan or persons devoted to him, even one who does not move away from there loses one's piety and falls down. So hearing defamation can engender disrespect, or what was referred to in an earlier passage of Jiva Gosvami as anādār, disregard or disrespect, which is the basis of offense. So to preclude, influences upon the psyche that can engender the attitude that gives rise to the behavior that is forbidden, to prevent that cycle from unfolding, then this injunction is given not to even let it enter the head. In other words, not to even listen to defamation of Vaishnavas. So in short, Jiva Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they explain this point of defamation of sadhus, defamation of Vaishnavas, and more broadly, offense to Vaishnavas as a whole. So that's point number one. Number two, one here this is the Padma Puran, one here who shall see with the intellect all of Shiva's qualities, names, and so forth to be distinct from Sri Vishnu is certainly a committer of enmity towards Vishnu's name. So this particular passage is open to multiple interpretations. So we'll just jump into the commentary here and see how they've dealt with this. So, quote, by the word and so forth, adi, is meant the forms, play, and so forth of Shiva. One here who shall see with the intellect Shiva's qualities, names, forms, and play to be distinct from Sri Vishnu certainly thus commits enmity, that is, offense, to Hari's name. So to see Shiva as an independent Ishvara from Vishnu is considered an aparad of Vishnu. In other words, he who is the Ishvara of all Ishvaras, the Ishvara of all, to see someone of independent of him, meaning who's not under his authority, is to subvert his recognition of him being the supreme Ishvara, the Ishvara of all. So to see one as independent is disrespectful to he under whom all exist. And this is how Sanatana Goswami comments on this in the section on this verse. Now, I've got another passage from the Durdaivam here, which comes way later in the middle of the discussion of Shivratri, in a completely different section of the text, in a commentary when he's explaining why Vaishnavas observe Shivratri. He also comes back to this point, and he makes an interesting gives an interesting explanation. So I've also included this here. So this is also Sanatana Goswami. He says, one here who shall see with the, he's repeating the verse, one here who shall see with the intellect all of Shiva's qualities, names, and so forth, to be distinct from Sri Vishnu is certainly an offender of Hari's name. And so forth was written previously in the stotra about offenses to the blessed name. Thus, in this regard, the siddhānta is this. Quote, Sri Vishnu is one deva, and Shiva is another deva. When in this way, Shiva is conceived as being distinct from Sri Vishnu, offering obeisances and so forth to him, that is Shiva, is verily inappropriate for Vaishnavas. But, with this sense of non-distinction, quote, Sri Shiva is also a guna avatar of Vishnu, just as Matsya and others are Leela avatars of Sri Vishnu. That offering of obeisances and so forth to Shiva is not faulty, and rather is verily a quality, because of its culminating specifically in a particular form of bhakti to Bhagavan. So again, he's speaking about the context of observance of Shivratri. So he's saying that Shivratri is to be observed by Vaishnavas, because this was a controversial subject, especially in the 1100s, 1200s, 1300s. In that era, there were wars and violence and assassinations and so forth going on between different kingdoms and camps of Shaivites and Vaishnavas. So there was a period where people considered, it wrong for Vaishnavas to show any respect to Shiva at all. So here the point is made that it depends on what the mentality of the person is. If the person is honoring Shiva as a supposedly independent divinity of Vishnu, then that's disrespectful of Vishnu, the supreme divinity. But if one is honoring Shiva as an avatar of Vishnu, in other words, as a subordinate divinity, then not only is that not wrong, rather that's meritorious. Rather, that's also a form of bhakti. So to see Shiva as, quote, separate, it depends on how that separatism is conceived as far as what determines it to be quote-unquote offensive or not. Okay, so I'll read here Jiva Goswami's explanation of this offense, and then I'll conclude for today, having gone this far. So, Jiva Goswami gives a little different interpretation. He says the following: thus, in this way, that is, as per the numerous statements from Shastra, cited in this section to show that all the names of the various devas are actually names of Bhagavan Vishnu, which he has allotted to those devas. So this is the context in the Bhakti Sandarbha. Because of Sri Vishnu's being well known to be all-containing, that is, the ultimate being who contains even all other devas, one who shall see, even with the intellect, the qualities, names, and so forth of Shiva to be distinct from him, that is, from Vishnu, that is, to be existent by means of another potency, a potency thought to belong to another devata, rather than to belong ultimately to Sri Vishnu himself, and be invested into such a devata by Sri Vishnu, is an offender of the name, is the meaning. If there was a sixth case ending intended to be read in the word Vishnu in the verse, which as per the rules of grammar can be interpreted to be in either the fifth or the sixth case, with the intent of conveying non-distinction between the two, i.e. between Shiva and Vishnu, then the phrase "and of Sri Vishnu" would have been expected to have been found in the text, and the word "and" would have been used to fulfill this expectation. This is to say, since the word cha, or "and," was not used in the text following the compound Sri Vishnos, this compound should be interpreted to be in the fifth grammatical case rather than the sixth. With this intention specifically of his preeminence in comparison to Shiva, the word Shri was also used only there, that is, only in compound with the word Vishnu, and not with the word Shiva. Therefore, in regard to the compound and offense to the name of Shiva, stated in the later verse regarding the ninth offense, that Sri Vishnu in particular is primarily referred to by the word Shiva is intended. In the Vishnu Sahasranama and elsewhere as well, the names Stanu, Shiva, and so forth are just the same. That is, they refer primarily to Sri Vishnu rather than to Shiva, even though they are commonly understood to refer primarily to Shiva. So basically what he's saying is that a couple verses later, the word Shiva is actually a name of Vishnu. But in this verse, the name Shiva is not a name of Shiva, the name Shiva is not a name of Vishnu, it's the name of Shiva who we think of as Shiva. And then he's clarifying that it's not a word that ends in a U in Sanskrit, when it takes an ablative or a genitive declension, is spelled exactly the same. So, according to context, you have to understand whether it's intended to be read as an ablative or as a genitive. So, Jiva Goswami's analysis here is to demonstrate why it's not an ablative, rather it's a genitive. So, in other words, the main point he's making is that all the names of all the devatas are actually names of Bhagavan, and he's given them those names in accord with the particular functions that he has them fulfilling within their roles within the universe. And to conceive of these divinities that are named by him, empowered by him, given a role and given a capacity to fulfill that role by him, to conceive of them to be independently existent, independently capable, independently active of he who provided everything for them, is disrespectful of, or is to lack a full regard for, the position of Vishnu, he who is containing, empowering all others. So, like this. Alright, I'll conclude here. We're out of time for today. So, I know this is rather technical, but it's important, and I think it's useful also to read Sanatana Gosvami and Jiva Goswami's commentaries right next to each other. And in some cases, some nice subtleties come out, especially regarding the 10th offense and other points that come up later. So, from time to time, it's always healthy to remind ourselves of these sobering features of our spiritual ideals, and remind ourselves of how we can take care to show honor to all that is dear to Bhagavan, all that is integral to Bhagavan, and all that is due and most worthy of such honor. So, okay, I see a hand. Please let me know.
Pranam, Baba.
Pranam.
Regarding the first offense, I apologize if you already went over it. Could you define the Vaishnava? Who is the Vaishnava that is being spoken of for the first offense?
As you can see in the commentaries, there isn't any specific analysis of that. So, from that absence of specificity, we can infer an intention of generality, which is to say that any Vaishnava would be applicable, or there would be a consequence of offending any sort of Vaishnava at all. So, who is a Vaishnava? Then, if we go by the Hari Bhakti Vilas or by the Bhakti Sandarbha, then the most broad definition is one whose devata is Vishnu is a Vaishnava. So anyone who worships Vishnu is a Vaishnava. And broadly speaking, the Kanishta Bhagavat is said to be anyone who has Shraddha and worship of Bhagavan. So even if they don't worship Bhagavan, even if they just have some degree of even, regard based on folk tradition for the worship of Bhagavan, they too, in the loosest sense, are a Vaishnava. So going on from there on up to, Uttam Bhagavatas and Mahatmas and everyone, all fall within the broad category of Vaishnava. And we can say that, that the severity or consequence of an offense is also partially informed by the caliber of the Vaishnava that is offended. In other words, to commit offense to someone who's exceedingly dear to Bhagavan will have more severe consequences than perhaps someone who's a Vaishnava only in the loosest sense. But nevertheless, not that we then decide, okay, therefore I can, I don't need to respect so-and-so. Rather the spirit of it is that let us see, and as we'll get to in the next verse, where the prescriptions about how to avoid offense are given, how to see the presence of Bhagavan in everyone, how to see not only Vaishnavas as worthy of honor, but how to see even every living being as pervaded by Bhagavan, worthy of respect by virtue of the presence of Bhagavan, how to ultimately become completely steeped in an entire view of the world in which everything is worthy of honor, is a manifestation of Bhagavan's grace, etc. This is the overall thrust, if you will, of the Vaishnava culture and the spirit of taking of Hari's name. So I'm elaborating a little bit, but in short, to your answer, there isn't a specific analysis of who a Vaishnava is here in the section about these offenses, so we understand it refers to the Vaishnava in the most general sense. Is that clear?
Okay, thank you. Yes, it is, thank you.
Then another hand?
That's my, I think. Jai Radhe.
Jai Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri Radhe. So the second Shikshastakam expresses Mahaprabhu's lack of misfortune or karma that enables him, past karma, that allows him to taste the holy name. And later on in Chaitanya-charitamrita, I think it's Madhya, he says that he clearly says that if tears don't fall from your eyes while chanting the name, the only reason is aparat. So it seems like the Mahaprabhu displays two different positions here. And so I know that some commentators say...
Sorry, I didn't catch the distinction between what the two positions are.
The one position is Mahaprabhu says, oh, I'm not qualified, I don't have no taste. So means that's why it means I don't have anurāga, I don't have prema or symptoms of prema that comes without explanation. But then he says, when he instructs devotees, he says, oh, the reason why you don't chant, why don't you cry while chanting is because you commit offenses. So,
okay, so, I mean, what we've discussed tonight would be all in line with what you're saying is your second point. The reasoning in the first point, I don't recall saying anything like that.
Oh, well, what I understood is that durdaivam, meaning he refers to his previous activities, karma that he must have performed in the past, which is another subject. But
I mean, so karma. I mean, I hope that it was quite clear that the word durdaivam means aparad.
Okay. Fine. So this brings the point that in one point, in Shakti Shastra, Mahaprabhu shows himself as, as a regular person who has lived in this samsara life and committed all sorts of aparadhas. And this conflicts with his actually acharya stature when he speaks and teaches about holy name and the religious actually tips of prema bhakti in Gambhira. So these two collide, in my understanding, and so I'm not sure how to take the second Shikshashtakam. Is it his expression of a devotee, supposed to be a devotee, that he thinks of himself as a devotee living this samsara? Or does he really feel stuff? It's really hard to grasp that attitude of Mahaprabhu, why he would say things like that if he's actually, later on, he displays the role of Acharya in later life.
Well, the one thing I read in the last class is the introduction to this verse that's given by the commentator on Padyavali. He introduces this by saying, Bhagavan in the form of Gaurachandra, for the sake of teaching others, describes the greatness of the name as though condemns himself for lacking anurāga, and prays to himself for the sake of increasing his anurāga. So the commentator takes it that Mahaprabhu is expressing this for the sake of teaching others, and in doing so is adopting the mentality and adopting the manner of expression of a person whom he's trying to instruct. So from that perspective, it's not that Mahaprabhu himself literally entirely feels this way. Rather, it's a mentality that he's adopting and expressing for the sake of teaching others. This is one way it can be interpreted. And the other interpretation, which is also something we discussed, I think, was it here? Or sometimes I don't always remember what we've already read and what's coming later, so I don't. Let me see. Right, and also in the last class I brought up this point where it says that the nature of prem is that one who has prem feels, I don't have even a trace of prem.
I see, right.
So if we take it in that sense, then this is an expression of humility. And last time we talked about how humility and prema have a mutual cause and effect relationship. So when one has prema, one feels that one doesn't because of the humility that prema inspires. And then that humility further motivates one to long for more prema, and then each intensifies the other. So, taken in that sense, we can say that it may also have been a genuine feeling of his when he is absorbed in bhakta bhav. Then he may feel that that sense of longing and that sense of humility that is found in the heart of bhaktas.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for reminding that. Can you have another question if there's no hands?
Sure.
Others. Yeah. From what we hear and Goswamis didn't really emphasize of number of names, and we discussed this earlier. There's no stress of how many names you should chant as your prescribed sadhana. Yes, we see gurus in the past or in current time. They prescribe 16 rounds. They will prescribe 1 lakh, and so on and so forth. And is this considered as the order of the potency of this kind of chant is basically Guru Seva primarily, or is it Nam Seva, where the effect is coming from Guru, his blessings, or is, anyway, let me conclude that question, but since this order is given against the Shastra, actually speaking, because Goswamis didn't recommend any numbers or highlight anything on that. So if this order is a part of this just relationship between Guru and disciple, and the strength of this kind of chanting is based on Guru's blessings, or is this so basically I'll leave it at that. So can you comment, what's the strength of this kind of chanting will come? Of course, depending on how one chants, but if this is so prevalent in society, of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, how we can see this kind of instructions in the light of Goswamis?
Well, as you say, we don't find in the Sindhu any quantitative prescriptions regarding japa or any other particular sadhana practice. And in Hari Bhakti Vilas, there in some cases is some mention about the mahatmya of certain things, but there's no fixed prescription that everyone all must do one particular way, or that necessarily any certain quantity is guaranteed to produce any certain effect. So if we were to, and nor do we see any such expression anywhere in the works of Jiva Gosvami or Raghunath Das Goswami or what have you. However, there is, and there has long been, a custom of people establishing certain quota for their daily sadhana. And even in the Chaitanya Bhagavat verses, where the Mahamantra is said to have been encouraged to be chanted by Mahaprabhu, he has this phrase, nirbandha, that according to some quota, there should be a chant. The name should be chanted according to a quota. So, for hundreds of years, the quota of 1 lakh has been observed by many. In the modern day, the missionary groups promote this quota of 16 rounds, and various other things can be found. And we can say it's not something that's directly enjoined in the works of the Goswamis, nor is it something entirely contrary to them either. And we hear in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, a verse we discussed earlier, that the disciple will see the devata, the mantra, and the guru as 3 manifestations of one entity. That they'll see all 3 as one, so to speak. So, as per the guidance that a particular guru, who's the animate, talking manifestation of the deity who's encouraging the disciple to worship the mantra or the name form of the same devata, the manner of guidance, the manner of teaching that particular guru gives, then, provided that it's not out of line, if there's some quota attached to the advice as per the discretion of that guru observing the characters and circumstance of that particular disciple, then that's perfectly fine. That there needs to be like one and only one quantity for the whole of society, and that there's no opportunity to adjust the quantity to suit the needs and stages of the individual, that may be problematic in some cases. But when a guru has an actual personal relationship with the student, and knowing the student, knowing the student's life circumstances, knowing the student's stage and capability, gives some advice or gives some recommendation as a way of engaging the student, then fine, then that's perfectly all right. And the exact quantity that's prescribed may not be, a direct injunction of the Shastra, but it's a guideline given by the guru, and the disciple will do very well to carefully follow it.
Right. Yeah. In Gosvami Ashtaka by Shivacharya, there's one shloka he writes that Goswamis were chanting Naam all the time. I try to find it right now.
Well, it says Samkhya Purvaka Nama Gananatibi, that they would chant the name according to a quota. So what was that quota? He doesn't say. And it's only in like third generation literature that we hear, the Goswamis chanted 1 lakh, or they chanted this, or they chanted that. None of the earlier literature, their own literature, makes any specific mention of that.
So how many years after the Goswamis departed, they start writing like this? I mean, the commentaries start mentioning.
I mean, to give you an exact number off the top, I can't give you an exact number off the top of my head.
Interesting.
50 years, 100 years, something like this, but, In any case, we know that, the whole idea of chanting according to a quota is for the purpose of one's sadhana not regressing. But at the same time, there's that Tripadi in the Chaitanya Charitamrita where it explains that by austerity, charity, by japa, by vidhi bhakti, the madhurya of Krishna is durlabh, very difficult to find. Kevala raga marge, only by following the path of raga marg can the madhurya of Krishna be easily attained. Only then does it become sulabha. So through the whole path taught in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the idea of lobha, the idea of the pursuit of madhurya, all of these things have nothing to do with quotas. Right? The whole motivation for following the path, the whole primary content of the path, none of that has anything to do with repetitive or merely quantitative practices in the least. So to integrate some type of quantitative, repetitive practice into that is for the sake of protecting the person from the mind getting excessively distracted, from digressing from the process. But it's not that the greater the quantity, the greater the attainment, the greater the quantity, the greater the advancement. There's no direct correlation between the two. So this is something that sometimes gets hazy in people's minds, and they have a tendency to think whoever chants X number of lakhs more is better, or whoever does the greatest quantity of this and that must be more advanced. But there's actually nothing like that. Quote unquote advancement, the only thing that determines the level of one's bhagavatva is one's bhav. And bhav is not measurable or necessarily quantifiable by any means. So these things are there, they have their place, but they ought not be given excessive importance either. They should be understood to be part of the overall custom and practice of the sadhana and given due regard, but not undue excessive regard either. Some balanced, nuanced understanding of their function is important.
Yet it's observed that quantitative chanting, like a lot of chanting, will change one mindset, and the bhava appears as well. Just because of a lot of chanting, the mind being conditioned to the name and draws in its own function of chanting, even mindlessly, I would say. So that's, as far as I understand, that it's not about quantity, yet the quantity may, if properly placed or practiced, may increase, facilitate a rise of bhava. That's experienced, practical evidence of it, actually. So, of course, one may chant a lot for some time and then stop, which is a proof of that actually there was not much of a bhava there, but it's observed that, as I'll repeat myself again, that a lot of chanting actually conditions the mind to chant, and there's a strong effect on someone practitioner's life, on how he conducts himself in context of raga, or the bhava is very definitely is part of it. The only thing that is permanent of this experience is questionable. So there's a fact for sure, but there's not it's not guaranteed that somebody will obtain prema, right? Just by numbers. And this work actually, what you're trying to say is that, right?
One name will do. As we read today, one name is enough.
With a feeling, deep, profound affection. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, one more hand.
Pranam Baba, thank you very much for the class. I have a question about a shloka, which is on the very first page of today's file. In particular, it says, obeisance and obeisance forever unto they who speak Hari's name while sleeping, and so forth. I was wondering, what does it really mean to speak Hari's name while sleeping? Does it mean that these highly elevated Vaishnavas, they develop a skill that they're able to consciously control their dreams, and they see themselves chanting the name in their dreams while sleeping, or do they physically pronounce Hari's name while being asleep and not seeing any dreams? Or what does it really mean? And if this practice is described somewhere in the Shastra, and if it's maybe recommended to develop the skill to control one's dreams, so that even in the dreams, we are concentrate our unconscious mind on the Hari's name. Could you please elaborate a little bit on this?
I've never seen anywhere in the texts any specific guidance or rules or procedure regarding that. My understanding is that someone chanting while they're sleeping means that in their dreams they may be chanting, and that may be heard by people who are nearby. I always remember when I was a brahmachari in the temple, I had a fellow who moved into the room that I was in, who was much older than me, and for some time was considering me like a young lad who didn't know what was what, and he needed to tell me many things. And so I was just trying to be polite and nice to him and whatever. And then finally one day I was somewhere and he came up to me with this like strange look on his face. And I was a little bit nervous. Oh no, what's he gonna do to me now? And then he says, I need to apologize to you. And I said, why? And he said, it's like the third night in the row I'm hearing you chanting slokas in your sleep. Who are you? Like, what is this? How do you do this? And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. If that's true, it's beyond me. It's nothing intentional. I'm not staying up in the middle of the night saying anything. If I'm saying something unbeknownst to me while I'm asleep, I'm unaware of it. And from that time, he never bothered me anymore. So, but really I had no idea that I was, that time I was young, I was memorizing so many verses and reading so many things for the first time. And I guess, in my sleep I was singing various verses, but I have zero remembrance of any of it. So when I see this statement, I just think of it like that someone in the course of, sleeping might end up in their dreams or, whatever, chanting the name or singing some poem or what have you. So I can just say that much. I've never seen any teaching regarding it, and my assumption would just be that in your waking life, if you're prone to chanting, then in your dreaming life it'll probably carry over.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
If I can add here, is that if you chant a lot, like whole day, and as I say, the mind gets so conditioned that in the morning you just half awake and you hear your mind chanting Mahamantra. It's just the mind, it's just programmable. So it's another few cents I can throw in.
Yes, the mind will get programmed by a lot of chanting. All right, well, let's conclude for today. We've gone about an hour and a half. So in our next go, we'll hopefully get through the rest of the discussion of the Nāmaparādhas. So praying to Mahaprabhu that we may sincerely reflect, or at least I myself may sincerely reflect on this durdaivam and have renewed resolve to chant the name free from aparad. Vaishnavibhyo namo namah. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai Shri Shri Radhe.
Jai Shri Radhe.
Jai.
Hari-nāma.